Hey, everybody. Welcome to the official Do Good Better podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Kirby. Of course, we talk to folks, small, medium-sized nonprofits doing wonderfully large things. I got a good one for you today. I'm recording on a Monday. I needed a pick-me-up. It's kind of drizzly today. I needed something to motivate me to do as much good as possible. I found it, and I think you're going to find one as well. So our guest today, I think you're going to love it, is Jacqueline Villeneuve-Ahmed. She is the founder of ZLT Hope Homes. She is the founder of She Matters, recent founder of SAEF, which is a social enterprise group that helps this. I mean, it's ridiculous. If you don't think you're doing enough, A, you aren't. And B, we're going to get all inspired on really trying to develop a safer society for sort of sexual violence in general. That's the topic today. Sounds serious, but really there's, I love the light at the end of the tunnel. I love this is what we're doing to make the world a better place. You're going to get that today with Jacqueline. Welcome to the official Do Good Better podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited. So if somebody's scrolling through the old YouTubes, they're scrolling to iTunes. It's like, this is an interesting topic, Patrick. I'm interested in listening, but I don't know who Jacqueline is. I don't know who all these pieces to the puzzle are. I'm going to give you the floor, 5,000 foot view on who you are, what you do, and kind of how we're chatting today.
Great. So I am a nonprofit founder and a founder of a social enterprise. And really my purpose is creating a safer space for survivors of sexual violence. I myself am a survivor, and I really took my experiences with healing from sexual violence and channeled that into my work with my nonprofit organizations. And with my work with both ZLT Hope Homes and She Matters, we've been able to create a safer society for survivors, both in Kenya and in Canada, across North America, and really around the world, where survivors feel that their voices are heard and that their rights are being protected.
That's beyond fantastic. And again, I'm kind of telling the listening audience, this is going to be one of those like, all right, I can do this. We can actually make the world a better place. So let's start in Kenya. Let's work our way back to Canada and then through North America. That's where we're going to take our journey. Is walk me through your thought process, your creation of the ZLT Hope Homes. It's in Kenya. Why Kenya? Why that as a starting place for your nonprofit founding adventures?
So I really started my nonprofit journey at a very young age. I was only 17 years old when I founded ZLT Hope Homes. And I've really gone through a substantial evolution since that time. When I began, I was 15 and I had first started volunteering with a large North American nonprofit organization that allowed young people to go on trips abroad. I was always very interested in African politics and history. I was also a fellow politics major in university. So even prior to completing my education, I knew that this was something that I was very interested in. Of course, at 15 years old, you cannot go volunteer in any areas, nor with conflict, nor do you have any skill set to really be an asset in those types of situations. So I went on sort of a voluntourism type trip, to be frank. And I really just discovered that I was very interested in the culture that existed within Kenya, and just providing support in any capacity that I could to vulnerable communities. And I knew this again at a very young age, that this was what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I remember even at 15 with this volunteer group saying to our facilitators that one day I would be moving there, founding a nonprofit. They thought I was absolutely nuts. But the following year went back with my mother, really showed her sort of my interest with working with children who had either been affected by the orphan crisis that exists in Kenya, or just the effects of poverty, the cycles of addiction that many, especially single mothers, experience. And it really resonated with me that I felt I had the ability to provide support in a way that wouldn't necessarily emotionally be too much for me as a founder. And so I created a partnership with a member of the local community that I met in that second trip rather. And that was really sort of the foundations of ZLT Hope Homes. I returned to Canada. I was in my final year of high school. We began fundraising for potentially one day founding a safe house for children and youth affected by physical and sexual violence or abandonment. And within 1 year after graduation, I moved to Kenya. And again, this was very much you had absolutely no qualifications to do any of these things, which I realize now, but it's one of those stories where it actually translated to be an organization that's led by a local team and really does amazing work for children and youth who are affected by, again, just physical or sexual violence or abandonment. And it's something that I myself experienced as well. So we were able to connect on those levels, and where we have a lot of support for our healing journey in North America, in Kenya, there are very limited resources. And even for children who experience abandonment, you're immediately vulnerable to sexual violence if you are left alone on the streets. So we really try at ZLT Hope Homes to foster that safe environment for children who have gone through that trauma. And again, we have a very comprehensive team of locals who run our operations. And I really work in collaboration with that team to help with fundraising and just the general direction of where we're going to go and expand in the future. And also bring forward my experiences as a survivor as well to the work that we do there.
One of the things that I love what you said, there's a lot. Two things I particularly enjoy from the nonprofit side is you took the leap knowing that you didn't have all the necessary skill sets. So the self-awareness that at such an early age as a founder, there's a lot of old elder statesmen who founded nonprofits that don't come to that realization soon enough. And the second thing is that you actually did something with it, which is what you partnered with and had the team in the place in which you wanted to make the impact lead it. Yeah, you may have had the concept. Yeah, you may have had a hand in sort of creating the atmosphere in order to help, sort of push what you wanted to accomplish, was provide a safe space for individuals who are sort of in this abandonment area, but you let them lead themselves. And that's such a mature thing to have as a young founder of a nonprofit, but you did it. And a lot of nonprofits, a lot of small nonprofit leaders are not self-confident enough to believe in their own abilities to make decisions or do things. And they sit on ideas or they sit on conversations. How did you overcome that? Because that's a big conversation to have with smaller nonprofits, is that they don't believe enough of themselves. But you're saying as a teenager, you're understanding that you have to go and do it and take your risks. How do you rack that through your brain?
Well, I actually grew up with a family member who had extensive Experience within the nonprofit sector, and I looked up to him as one of my mentors. His name is James Fraser. He worked for MSF, then founded an organization in partnership with Dr. James Urbinski in Malawi. And he would share stories from the field and from his experiences within the nonprofit sector. Within my last year of high school, I actually did an internship with his organization to really help me build on some skills prior to moving to Nairobi and actually starting the first sort of foundational year of my organization. So I think that was very formative in really understanding the realities of operating a nonprofit.
Yeah.
And within my first year as well, I really tried to be very mindful of the fact that even though I have this idea and this passion, I need to consistently be educating myself on best practices for the nonprofit sector. Ask fellow founders how their organizations operate, what works for them, what doesn't. Have very transparent conversations as well about what to look out for, and really learn from others' mistakes as well as their successes. So I went into this sector really understanding that even though you have a great idea, it doesn't mean you're going to have all the answers. There will be substantial challenges that you will have to face. And when those challenges came my way, I was able to navigate through them better because I was very cognizant of the fact that these challenges would come. You can't solely root everything in just your passion for your cause and your purpose. But I just genuinely really had that drive to ensure that the children and youth that we were working alongside, or would one day be working alongside in our first year when we hadn't actually opened yet or founded the organization formally, I just knew that the experiences that I had within my own upbringing and my own healing journey as a survivor, it's what every person fundamentally deserves. And that was sort of my root in ensuring that I would not give up, as others who supported me throughout my journey did not let me give up when I was going through that healing process. And I sort of navigated just growing up, in addition to healing largely, within my time in our first formative years. But I think it's really important for any young founders who are sort of in that idea stage to be very understanding of the fact that you will have highs and lows. Take time to learn from people who have been doing it much longer, but also don't allow anyone to tell you that your dreams aren't valid specifically because of your age. I myself am proof that you can persevere, as are many other young founders, but you have to be aware as well that there will be challenges.
But again, your intuitive nature is to, all right, we'll get and lean on a mentor, ask somebody who is in the field. And really, I think a lot of nonprofit leaders are hesitant to do that because they don't want to be seen as somebody who doesn't know the answer. Well, it's okay. You're young. You haven't done this a long time. You probably need a little bit of guidance. It's totally okay to ask for help. And I think in the nonprofit world, there's a little pride that happens internally, like, no, if I'm going to do this, a little stubbornness to us. And then there's also this feeling, if I open up myself to saying I don't know, somebody's going to catch wind and that's going to reduce the amount of support that I get. Well, that's not ever the case. There's never been somebody who says, a donor asks you a question, or a supporter asks you a question, or somebody who you're working with asks you something you don't know the answer to it, say, I don't know. It's okay. You get to have another touch point with that individual. You get to reach out and say, hey, I want to follow up with you to talk about what we discussed that I didn't have answer right away. And then you begin a dialogue. And that dialogue is way more valuable than what you're pontificating about constantly, is because now you're getting a reaction from them. You're getting a perspective from them. They're now a part of your process. They're part of your success. So I really just love that idea of, like, if you don't have a mentor, if you don't have somebody who is a soundboard to bounce ideas off of, get one. It's okay. This is proof of it. So your experience with ZLT Homes over the course of the pandemic, how did your fundraising go? How did your organization deal with it? And as we all know, we all had our pitfalls and pivots. So kind of work through what that looks like from an international organization, because we'll turn and talk a little bit about She Matters next, because that's more of a domestic sort of project as well. So talk a little bit about ZLT. How did that fare during pandemic stuff? What did you learn? Advice that you can give to other nonprofits who are working from an international standpoint?
I mean, it was a very challenging first year. 2020 was by far our most difficult year for fundraising. We are really rooted in sort of gathering the support of my local community here in Canada. We have donors who have been with us for the last 8 years of our operation cycle. who have followed my journey since I was 17, and not being able to have that in-personal connection that we typically do with our annual gala was extremely challenging. Fortunately, we were able to still have the support of our corporate donors. They still made their contributions, but it was very challenging from a personal one-time or monthly donor perspective, because we didn't have that reminder for people at an event to make their annual contribution. And I mean, it was a pandemic, and in Canada, we're still living it. We still don't have, we're essentially still largely where we were last year. We still can't be out in person. We're actually in a lockdown here right now in Ontario. Many people are not vaccinated for those who wish to be. We're still largely struggling, and many people experienced COVID-related layoffs. So fortunately, in our primary community where we fundraise, we're a mining community, and the mining industry was not hit as hard. But with that being said, a lot of corporate giving structures were no longer able to still give the amounts that they would have typically been able to give. Many of our 8-year-long supporters still decided to continue to support in the capacity that they did previously. But in a year where we thought we were going to be able to adopt new campaigns and really try new innovative things, that idea really went out the window very quickly. I mean, just from an operations standpoint, life in Kenya was extremely difficult. They had government lockdowns for over 9 months. Our children did not go to school for 9 months. They just simply closed down all of the schools. We had staff which couldn't get to work, so we had to operate with a very lean team. And that in itself was very challenging for the team that remained. Fortunately, a lot of our kids were starting to get older and were able to help out within our safe house. We also had to stop doing a lot of our community-based programs because you can't go out into the community. When you're thinking of how we navigate a pandemic in North America, the ability to just social distance is not there in a lot of the urban settlements, or better known as slums, that we work in for our community programming. So you're not going to risk the health and safety of a staff member to go into the community and run empowerment workshops when you can't justify sending someone there when they could potentially get COVID, especially when hospitals are not equipped to really facilitate any type of assistance because they're not being supported by their own government. So that was a huge challenge for us, and one that we shared with many of our donors. So we were able to still keep some support to get us through the year. Fortunately, by some miracle, we were able to receive support from a community foundation at the beginning of January. And largely how we cultivate our donors is through restorative storytelling. So maintaining the privacy of the people that we work with, but really sharing the impact of supporting a survivor or a child or youth who has experienced some form of abuse, and how their life has been impacted through our programming and holistic healing methods. So we had a family that had a fund that they were looking for organizations to support after they had lost their daughter to, unfortunately, a plane crash that took place in Ethiopia. They had already been aware of our organization, and they were able to provide us with sufficient funding for nearly 2 years of operation. But that was largely due to years and years and years of storytelling and just being true to our mission. So at times when you sometimes feel like I'm running on a treadmill that's never ending, and I'm telling these stories and I'm hoping that people will buy into it and support, that was very validating to know that in this family's time of immense trauma, and also starting to heal from their loss, they decided to select us as one of their beneficiaries for an incredibly generous donation to our organization. So we managed to navigate through what would have been another very challenging year through the support of that family foundation. But had we not had that, we would have definitely been facing another challenging year. One thing that we are, and of course, we're still actively fundraising. We're not just going to sit with, here's 2 years of operation, let's just coast for a while. So the benefits of that now as well is that because we've received a substantial amount of funding from a family foundation, we're now able to be competitive in the grant space in Kenya. So with funding specifically in Kenya, you're typically needing to have an operating budget of 150,000 to 250,000 annually just to receive any sort of sustainable or sufficient rather grants.
Sure.
So we've been able to sort of tap into new opportunities that we never had accessible to us before. But yeah, we're also just really, as our children and the individuals that we're supporting through our community program are growing, we've tapped into new innovative ways of involving them in our fundraising process. So with our virtual gala, we were able to tap into Kenyan artists participating in some of our fundraising initiatives. Mm-hmm. We were also able to tap into some of our kids who have very creative interests being a part of putting together that virtual gala. And coming out this year, we're also implementing some mini courses that they will actually be creating that our donors can then buy into with their families to learn about some of the dances that we're doing in our home, or the cooking that we're doing, or beadwork taught by some of the moms that we work with. So we were trying to really tap into what the skill sets are of the people that we actually work with in a way that's not sad and sharing their story and sharing their personal details, but saying, this is a great person who has this amazing skill. You're looking for things to do in the pandemic, so learn from the people that we work with in Kenya and take it back to your families in North America. Mm. So trying to tap into a lot of those more collaborative ways of fundraising is kind of where we're headed. But in addition to that, of course, the less exciting grants and things of that nature. But yeah, it's been a very, I'd say, transformative year for us, even though it was by far our hardest year.
It's another example of always push forward. Don't pause. As exhausting as it is, tell that story the 30th time, the 50th time, because that is the way that nonprofits are going to survive and thrive, is just that constant push. And it is, you're right, it's on a treadmill. It never ends, honestly. Even when you think it's going to end, it never ends. And that's why you need to have those victories, those small wins, the big wins. You need to celebrate those, because if you don't, you forget why you're doing that in the first place. And I'd be reluctant if I didn't bring up, however, the organization that you also founded, which is She Matters. Now, that's domestically, sort of North America, Canada specific. Talk to me a little bit about that. And you're crazy enough to start one nonprofit. Let's start another one, right? That's how our brains work. What prompted this, and then what would kind of give me an overview of what She Matters is?
Sure. So She Matters actually started as a campaign for a charitable brand that we run within ZLT. We had shared a story of one of the young women that we work with who had experienced sexual violence, which resulted in a pregnancy. She and I connected. She was then supported by ZLT Hope Homes, and we called the campaign She Matters. And the real vision of this campaign was to just show support for survivors of sexual violence globally, and to be able to tell your story if you had experienced sexual violence in a safe space, to show this survivor that she was not alone. Mm-hmm. This was a little bit prior to the Me Too movement reviving. So at that time, there really weren't a lot of conversations about being a survivor in a way that felt empowering versus being rooted in being a victim. And so we initially started by just hosting an event in my local community here in Canada at one of the times when I was back in country. And I was absolutely blown away by the women who I looked up to as just figureheads in our community coming up to me and sharing their personal experiences with sexual violence in their childhood or in their teens or maybe early university years. And these were people who are fundamental leaders in our community. And just to see their vulnerability and see them connecting with this cause immediately showed me this needs to be something separate. This is not something that needs to just be a campaign. At this time, I had not shared my personal experiences with sexual violence yet. Everyone just assumed that I was interested in this specific issue because of the young woman's story that we were sharing in Kenya and the other children within our safe house that had experienced sexual violence. And it was within that first event that I shared for the first time that I too was a survivor. And after sharing that for the first time, I really started to use, again, that restorative storytelling to just take a little bit of my power back as a survivor, but also have the ability to connect with survivors quite literally all around the world. I was still between Canada and Kenya at this time. So our sort of foundations for She Matters started in Nairobi with a global virtual community. And so we very quickly saw that this is an issue affecting survivors all around the world. And there is a lot of beauty in seeing the similarities in what we're facing, regardless of our geographical location. So we have this virtual support community through our website that survivors can sign up for free. It's called She Rises. And this was something that we actually implemented last year. And we've seen a lot of substantial growth in the survivors that access this free community, just to know that they're not alone. In addition to that, we also have just our social media channels that are very active in educating survivors on their rights. We also have a podcast called the She Matters podcast, where myself and my co-host is actually in Kenya, share our personal journeys with sexual violence and have guests on that share their experiences with the topic as well. So we're really trying to show that as survivors, we do not need to feel that shame. It's not something we chose to happen to us. But when we actively engage in advocacy or just other ways of reclaiming our power and going through our healing experiences, we can really find peace and find strength in community. So that's largely how She Matters began, and it's really evolved into an organization that's by survivors for survivors. We actually operate with a really unique structure. We're 100% operating with the support of survivors in a volunteer capacity. So we all have jobs that we do 9 to 5, and then this is our way of, again, tapping into that reclaiming of our power, but also knowing that we're able to support our peers who are going through the same challenges, maybe at different stages. And we've also in the last year started to do a lot of advocacy and research work here in North America. So that's kind of the direction we shifted in when I relocated back to Canada in 2018 permanently. And it's been very eye-opening to see the just the reach that we've been able to create within North America, but also just seeing the impact of a group of volunteers who have personally experienced that particular issue, just finding their power and their strength through that advocacy work.
As part of your personal experience with it, I think there's a lot of individuals who get started in the nonprofit world because it's their passion project, or they're going to do something about something that the government can't, shouldn't, or won't do. And so they're into it because they're connected directly. The balance between this is what happens to my family, to me, to this is what happens to others. Did you find balance while kind of sharing your experience, or when you shared your experience, because there's other people who are working at organizations that don't have any sort of particular connection, even though they do, and they don't say it out loud. What was the reaction, or how did you begin to work effectively, more effective? Was it a challenge? How did that statement of fact. Hey, I'm a survivor. This is my story. Then what? Was there a sort of a visceral positive reaction? Was it as like, oh, now this is a personal vendetta thing? What's that experience like?
So it was really interesting. Largely, I never shared that I was a survivor because I was scared of the impact it would have on my donors within
Right.
ZLT.
Yeah.
So for many years, while experiencing domestic violence and abuse after having founded ZLT, I didn't share what I was going through because I was scared of losing donors. So the moment that I did, I remember just being filled with so much fear of what would happen next. But I was amazed at the support I received from donors, from community members, from people that I had never met. And it was almost like a light bulb went off where they started to realize this is largely why she's doing the work that she's doing in Kenya, right, why she's now doing the work that she's doing as She Matters. And it just seemed like a natural segue for most of my donors. They understood that this was an organization being led in a voluntary capacity, but they saw the synergy that it could have with ZLT. And largely everything that I do is rooted in that just support for survivors. So I was fortunately able to have the support of the community that I was most fearful of knowing this secret that I was withholding for such a long time. But there were definitely some challenging dynamics for people to sort of understand why I was sharing, as happens when any survivor shares. But within our organization, we've always been very conscious to focus on our experiences as survivors rather than calling out what we experienced. So it's all rooted in just survivors' rights and ensuring that we feel empowered and supported amongst our peers. And I think people saw that very early on, that this was a safe space and a community for survivors and not some personal vendetta.
Right.
We're not going after our abusers. We're seeking support for each other.
I think it's such a wonderful thing that you said that, because I think there's a lot of hesitancy to connect personally to some of these organizations that nonprofit leaders or founders work at. And so that gives, I think, everybody a little roadmap to help a little bit, because again, you feel a little bit alone as somebody who founds a nonprofit. There's not an instruction manual on how to personally connect it. So that's wonderful. And I appreciate your perspective on that, because that's an issue that nobody talks about. And so following your first steps, I think is a fantastic idea. I have another question before and again, I know we're coming to the end of our podcast, but I have so many questions for you. One of the things that I think is really important is some sort of balance between here's the reality of a serious issue, but here's the positive things that are coming from it. How do you balance it? Because you don't want to fluff or maybe even, glance over some of the more serious issues, because that means you're, ignoring the problem. But you don't want to be the Debbie Downer that talks about the problem, because that is, in a way, to the bigger donor base, a little more on the depressing side, right? You want to make sure that it's important, but you also need to have this sort of, hey, there's hope and positivity coming from this, getting your story out and having a support group. How do you balance that? In this, sexual violence is a very delicate sort of razor that you have to balance on. How do you do that?
So largely we try and connect people to the issue first. So just sharing basic global statistics: 1 in 3 women, 1 in 5 men. So someone in your life, based on those statistics alone, will experience sexual violence within their lifetime, either yourself or someone you know. So understanding that first is very fundamental in even approaching the topic, because the way you react to these types of organizations and causes, someone in your life who's been directly affected will see how you're reacting to that cause. So that's the number one thing we try and articulate to just the public and to our donors. Secondly, we try and approach the topic of sexual violence in a way that's approachable. So we have our podcast that's great for either survivors or allies, or people who want to understand a survivor's journey. They can easily, accessibly tap into that. Secondly, within our campaigns as well, we also try and make it sort of utilizing, I like to say, human language. So nothing that is like medical or legal terminology when we're explaining survivors' rights. We always phrase things in a way that's easy for anyone to understand, and really breaking down an incredibly complex process in a way that doesn't seem so scary. We also utilize a lot of like photography and videography in our work so that people can feel connected to actual humans who have experienced sexual violence, and always consistently tapping into that restorative storytelling where we're not making something depressing. We're just showing the reality of what people are experiencing in a way that helps you reframe sexual violence in your mind, that makes you feel like survivors are strong and empowered versus being rooted in victimhood. So that's largely what we try and do with She Matters, but also providing people with solutions is really key. So we offer them different tools that they can utilize to understand navigating the reporting system, different tools that they can utilize when supporting a survivor. So it's not just, this is the problem, donate and we'll find the solution. It's, here are some tools that you can utilize to actually help the survivors in your life. And if you like our work, sure, of course, feel free to support us. But largely, we also want people to be able to take action within their own lives, because they will know a survivor in some capacity.
Yeah, that's so perfect. Jacqueline, this has been so nice. Again, personally, I needed a big kick in the butt this morning to rock the entire week. And you did that. But more importantly, I think there's a lot of things that we unpacked here from somebody who is a founder, who maybe has founded young, who has a lot of actionable steps on what to do to positively kind of push forward, how to balance some intuitive, sort of thought process here. It's been wonderful, and what a roadmap you've given a lot of people who are in the nonprofit world. So I thank you so much. But I would be remiss if I didn't have everybody wanting to go and click and give as much as possible, not only to ZLT, but to She Matters. So how can people get a hold of you? How can people get a hold of your organizations? And how can they follow and like and click and then eventually donate and give you all the money? Floor is yours.
Okay, so you can find ZLT Hope Homes at zlthope.ca. So zlthope.ca. We are also on Instagram and Facebook at ZLT Hope Homes. And then for She Matters, you can find us at shematters.ca. And on Instagram or Facebook, we are at She Matters United. Perfect.
We will drop all of those links in the show notes. Thank you so much. Been a very awesome conversation. I'm so glad I know that you exist in this world. So thank you for that. And keep up the amazing work. Really excited to follow you and all of your successes going forward and getting the hell out of this pandemic so we can go back to doing what we do well, right?
Yes.
I love it. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for being a guest on the official Do Good Better podcast.